Gentlemen, good evening. How's everybody doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Just want to get things started off. Thank everybody for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Want to take this time out to thank my good friends Andy and AJ for chiming in as we have plenty to talk about tonight. Gentlemen, how's everybody doing?
Fantastic. Thanks for having us on, William.
Yeah, thanks, Will.
Definitely a pleasure. You know, you look at it, and this lockout in Major League Baseball has been going on for so long right now. To give you an idea, when this lockout began, we didn't know who the field of four was going to be for the college football playoff. We have that. We've seen a national champion crowned in college football. We've seen the playoffs of the NFL go down. We've seen a new Super Bowl champion be crowned. We've seen the NHL have their all-star break. We've seen the NBA's trade deadline come and go. We've even seen the NBA's all-star game come and go. Yet and still, no resolution in regards to this MLB lockout. And I am of the camp, and I've been saying this for some time now, and I'm going to continue to say this, and I want your take on this as well. But I would not be surprised, and honestly, I truly feel that we're not going to have baseball here in 2022, at least from an MLB aspect.
Wow, I think that's a bold statement, William. I think the two sides are very, very far apart. I feel that's obvious. This week here, they've announced they're going to sit down every day this week for negotiations, which should have happened way back in December when this whole lockout started. But they seem to be worlds apart. But I think it's going to start to hurt people's pocketbooks, the players' pocketbooks, and start to hurt the owners' pocketbooks when you really start to get into the regular season. I can see them losing the entire spring training. I think they'll probably lose a couple months of the regular season, but I think they'll salvage it kind of the way they did with the COVID season. And they'll have some resemblance of a season, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it, and, I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about it again tonight. To your point right there just doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency. And why is it taking to now for both parties to sit down and say, hey, you know what, we need to sit down and talk multiple times a week, as opposed to, okay, you know what, we'll come back, and see you maybe in a week or two. Oh, let's take a break around Christmas and what have you. And it's just like, you figure if you're going to take that break for that long, you need to come back and have your ducks in a row. That has not been the case. It's like, okay, well, the players still feel like they're being lowballed. And then, the owners come back in like a couple of weeks and basically with the same offer. The only things that they've been able to agree upon is expanding the playoffs. And me personally, I'm not a fan of that because you have 162 games to figure out, okay, who's the best team and who isn't. I totally get winning your division. You get in. I understand that. How many wild cards do we need? I think that, 2 wild cards per league, in my opinion, is more than sufficient. I think the wild card game itself brings a lot of excitement to the playoff round. It doesn't just give the wild card team, like it was in years past, an automatic passage into the playoffs. But nonetheless, they really have not gotten any closer on this than they were at the beginning. And honestly, I think that the owners were attempting to call the players bluffs on this, and the players so far have remained steadfast. But to your point, Andy, it's a situation where when the paychecks stop rolling in, I think there's going to be more sense of urgency.
I agree with you. Hoffman?
Yeah. I mean, we should just kind of explain what's out there on the table, or what it is that where the disagreement is coming from. And in doing my homework, I see that the owners want to replace arbitration, lower the luxury tax threshold, They want more revenue sharing, later free agency, and strengthen the luxury tax, expanded playoffs, and possible pitch clock, which is we can talk about that in a minute too. But I think that's just screwing the game way too much. It just Watucky and I talked about that earlier. We can get into that in a minute. The players want earlier free agency, no luxury tax, no revenue sharing, higher minimum salary, and a universal DH. To me, it just sounds like there hasn't been enough communication all around. There is, in past years, they managed to avoid lockouts by just going hard in the paint and making sure that the talks were just being had at the very least, and they weren't even getting that done this time. They should have been talking this whole time, and they haven't. They saw this coming, and everybody's been dragging their feet. I'm not sure why that's been happening, or why there has been so much procrastination, and why it's got to come down to this week. But I mean, if they want to save a baseball season, they're going to have to do something and look at more than just, oh, well, we're going to have to minimize spring training from like 7 weeks to 4 weeks. Who cares? I mean, I don't feel like that's where the season is long enough as it is. And spring training is nothing, really. I mean, it's like training camp. I feel like training camp in football is probably more fundamental or more useful than the spring training games. Really, I could be wrong, but I don't know. What do you think, William?
Well, I look at it like this. I mean, you figure with spring training, usually the veterans, they're going through the motions. They're trying to figure things out, especially like veteran pitchers. They're trying to tweak things here and there. I remember a story from several years ago when I met Tim Tuffle, and he talked about where the Tuffle Shuffle came from. And, he took some advice from Mike Schmidt, and he was trying things out in spring training, and he got a hit off of Nolan Ryan. And he knew that he wasn't going to get a hit off of Nolan Ryan when the season began, because Nolan Ryan was just like tweaking, pitches here or there to see what worked. And of course, Tuffle was right. So I think from a veteran standpoint, guys are just trying to go out there and, get themselves game ready. From a younger player standpoint, you need those reps. And those are the guys who are going to get hurt the most in this. But for me, one thing I want to touch on is the luxury tax. And I have not been a fan of this for a while, because in my opinion, I've always felt that, because like we've seen in recent years where the penalty for going over the luxury tax has increased and has really hampered the big market teams. And I've always felt that if you're going to have a hard cap like that at the top, you need to have a floor as far as the minimum that teams have to spend. And, unfortunately, MLB doesn't have that. And I think a prime example of that is what we've seen in recent years with the Boston Red Sox and Chicago Cubs, respectively. We saw the Boston Red Sox trade Mookie Betts, an MVP, in his prime because they couldn't afford him for the luxury tax. And we saw the Cubs basically dismantle a core that won them a World Series. And you figure if you added a piece here or there, they could have been right back into the mix to win another championship. And I think that's very telling. And I think that's very sad for baseball when you have two of your historic marquee teams in two of the bigger markets in the nation having to dismantle championship teams simply because of the luxury tax threshold. I think that stinks.
I agree. Yeah.
Well, like, would you say a minimum? That goes to what the players want. The players don't like the idea of this tanking for competitive reasons, for even pay reasons, obviously. If there's no floor, there's got to be a floor for the integrity of the game from a fan standpoint.
I agree.
Every time, from a fan standpoint, by the All-Star break whether your team's going to be dumping everybody they got, or whether you're going to compete, and it's only a handful of teams that are going to be the buyers. Everyone else is going to be looking to dump because they can. There's no penalty for doing so, And that means that 75% of your viewing audience could care less whether or not they catch the games or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in total agreement with you there. I mean, it's doing a disservice to the game because, for me, you're charging people major league money, but then you're putting a minor league product out there on the field, and that right there, I think, is a problem. You want to see competitive baseball, but you also want to see a team that is committed to going out there and putting a competitive product on the field. And we don't consistently see that. And, from an outsider's perspective looking in, I think that's why there was a lot of pushback from some of the owners in regards to allowing Steve Cohen to purchase the New York Mets. And I say that because Steve Cohen, he looks like a guy that has a little bit of George Steinbrenner in him. And of course, there were owners in Steinbrenner's heyday that did not like him either, because Steinbrenner was going out there, and his thing is, listen, he wants to spend money in order to win. He didn't have a problem going out there giving big bucks to Reggie Jackson at the time, or Dave Winfield, or Catfish Hunter, you name it. And the thing is, it's like a lot of these guys, they know that, unfortunately, from an ownership standpoint, they can make money without having to spend money. And, a lot of them, between the TV contracts, between the revenue sharing, and they can do this behind a curtain because, unlike the NFL, you don't really see a lot of MLB owners putting themselves out there on Front Street. Their idea of putting themselves out there on Front Street, they have their spokesperson, Rob Manfred, and of course, Rob Manfred is taking all the bumps and bruises for the decisions that they want right now. So I just think that the biggest thing, egos are really hurting this situation. And I think at the end of the day, the people who are suffering are going to be the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. You touched on Rob Manfred, and you said he's taking the brunt of this. Hoffman, we talked off the air prior to this. He's got to be one of the worst commissioners in sports right now, or in recent memory. Yeah. From the corniness of a runner on second, start extra innings, to the possible pitch clock that they want. Just the tweaks to the game. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they stink. I mean, listen, I know people personally that are pro analytics, and my thing is this: analytics to me has their place in the game. But the thing is, you look at these guys now; they can't go more than 5 innings without having, to come out of the game. And the thing is this, and I try to explain this to people who have never played baseball, who have never really sat down to understand the meat and potatoes of it. Everybody that gets on the mound is not meant to throw 100 miles an hour. You look at guys like Tom Glavine, you look at guys like Greg Maddux, they made a living in the major leagues for about 20 years apiece, working the corners, 90 to 92. Okay. And then on top of that, even the power pitchers like a Clemens, like a Randy Johnson, they knew how to turn it up when they had to. But even still, they weren't going to go out there and throw 97, 98 miles an hour every single pitch. And because of that, these guys are putting more stress on their arms. Then on top of that, they're relying so much on the fastball, which is the easiest pitch to hit in baseball. And of course, hitting baseballs are not easy at that level, but it's a straight pitch from that standpoint. But nonetheless, work on your secondary pitches, work on your curveball, work on your slider, work on your changeup. And even with like you see some of these guys, there's no need for you to throw a 94, 95 mile an hour slider. It's putting additional stress on your arm. These teams are so, bullpen conscious, trying to okay, just get 5 innings out of this guy, get an inning out of this guy. Listen, I grew up in an era, and I think we could all say that we grew up in an era where we consistently saw starting pitchers go in deep into the game. I mean, I remember when I was in high school and I saw Pedro Martinez take a perfect game to the 10th inning against the San Diego Padres. This is when he still pitched for the Montreal Expos, and he lost the game. Yeah, but the thing is, you know what? That guy went out there and gave his team an opportunity to win the game. You go back to the 1970s, which is arguably, the golden era of pitching. You had Steve Carlton, you had Tom Seaver, just to name a few. And these guys would consistently go out there and give you 300 innings each season. A guy nowadays, if he reaches 200 innings, it's like he's lauded. For me, can you imagine somebody going out there and taking Bob Gibson out in the middle of the sixth inning when he was dealing? And that's the other problem. And that's the other problem. It's like, no, listen, like these guys, they're focused so much on the stats. Oh, well, the tendencies, this, that, and the third. But I'm like, listen, sports, and of course, baseball is a sport. You have to use the good old fashioned eye test. You have to use your common sense. If this guy is on the mound and he's dealing, why are you going to take him out? Because then you're letting the opponent off the hook, because those hitters know we can't hit this guy tonight. And then you take him out, and that changes the complete complexity of the game. And 9 times out of 10, when I've seen that happen, either that team loses the game or that game goes into extra innings. And Rob Manfred is worried about pace of play, this, that, and the third. They have the technology out there for the robotic umpires, because how many times do we have to see the Joe West and the Angel Hernandezes of the world, go up there and mess games up and try to ruin the games with their egos? You've taken the arguments, or the arguing rather, of managers out of the game, but you're not. To me, I don't think they're holding the umpires accountable in that same way. Listen, we're not going to see the Jim Lelands and the Bobby Coxes and the Lou Pinillas of the world anymore going out there, even Earl Weaver, kicking up dust and going at it for about 5 minutes with the umpires over a call. But you got to hold the umpires accountable. But you look at it with this pitch clock foolishness, and that's exactly what it is. It's foolishness to go along with the runner on second. Honestly, for me, I hate watching a game when it goes to the extra innings, because I'm like, this is really what the game is coming down to. You can't even do a 4-pitch intentional walk. You have to make a signal to just say, okay, we're just going to go ahead and walk a guy. That's not baseball. That's not
right.
Baseball. It stinks. And it's like, to me, these guys, they don't get that concept. And, some people might look at me and say, I'm an old man, I'm a dinosaur on this. I'm like, no, right is right and wrong is wrong. And they're worried about, getting, game younger as far as fans, worried about, people's attention spans and stuff like that. I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid and I went to baseball games, I had my glove and I sat right there and I was totally attentive to the entire game. And usually, if I went with my parents, my mother would leave early because we wanted to beat traffic, and I was annoyed. And I started staying, for the entire game as I got older. But nonetheless, even to now, if I go to a game, I am fully attentive. You have people there that are not paying attention. They're just there just to be there. And it's like, I think they're doing themselves a complete disservice with this.
Well, like I was telling Hoffman, you didn't lose. Baseball didn't lose the people watching because of the electronics. You lost a huge fan base, or amount of your fan base, or percentage of your fan base, because of the 94-95 strike. That's when everybody stopped watching. Yeah. And the home run derby brought people back. But right around that time, computers started coming out. Then the technology started rolling out, and it kind of exacerbated it or sped it up, or whatever the term you want to use for it is. You don't need to do corny stuff to try and bring people back. The people that like baseball will still come back. You know what I'm saying? You kind of almost have to lean into what it is you are and to what it is you do. That one of the reasons I enjoy baseball is because when I go to a game, I can have a conversation like we're having right now and still know what's going on in the game. You can't do that in hockey where they're jumping over on line changes and all this stuff's going on back and forth. You know what I mean? It's a relaxing game. It's America's pastime. It's summertime. You know what I mean? You relax and you got them on the radio and you're listening to the game. It's what baseball is, to trying to speed it up, to try and make it into something that it's not.
It's blasphemy.
You're not gonna get the crowd that you want, and you're gonna alienate the baseball purists, if you will. old heads like me and Hoffman. You know what I mean? Like you're going to alienate us. So what are you doing to yourself? You're just damaging your product farther. Cut your losses, lean into what it is you do, kind of, I don't know how you would encourage people to lay off the metrics and allow, like you say, pitchers to go into go deep in games when they're dealing. But, play more small ball, stuff like that the purists and the people that actually enjoy baseball and have stuck with it the whole time, lean into that.
Part of me.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, man. Please.
Yeah. Sorry, William. Part of me wants to kind of think metrics and those over analytics because it got my Dodgers a World Series title 2 years ago.
Because they
pulled Blake Snell.
That's
if it wasn't for that. I mean,
and he was dealing in that game. He was dealing.
That put what you were talking about, William. That put that front and center for the entire world to see. When they did it, when they pulled a guy dealing in the World Series with the game on the line.
In the freaking World Series.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That's where it was just over the top. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. And you know what I call it? I call it analysis paralysis. And that's to quote, Robert Kiyosaki. Because I look at it, they're trying this whole positionless baseball thing. And the thing is, it's like baseball is not meant for your power hitter to be your leadoff guy. Your power hitter is in that cleanup spot for a reason. And you see it with so many different teams around baseball. And I'm like, I grew up in an era where, okay, you paid attention to the leadoff guy because you know what? He was a table setter. Granted, every team did not have a Ricky Henderson, but you still had Lance Johnson. You still had Tim Raines. You still had Vince Coleman. You still had Brett Butler. Guys who not only knew how to work the count, but they also knew how to get on base. And of course, if they got on base, that's where the excitement started. You're never going to see somebody even come close to touching Ricky Henderson's record for stolen bases. Why? Because they effectively taken the stolen base out of the game. I mean, you look at a guy like Tony Gwynn. If Tony Gwynn played now, he probably wouldn't have that much of a career because they probably try to make him something that he's not. Tony Gwynn was never a power hitter, but you look at a guy, Tony Gwynn was a great contact hitter, very rarely struck out. And there was a reason why you knew every single time that Tony Gwynn came to play for a season, you could pencil him in for 330 at least. If Tony Gwynn batted 315, it was like, what, that was a bad season for him. And of course, he wasn't the only guy like that. Wade Boggs, was another great contact hitter. You look at the Cardinals of the 1980s under Whitey Herzog. They just had speed and guys who could hit up and down that lineup. Vince Coleman, Willie McGee, Lonnie Smith, Jack Clark. We can just go right down the list. Guys, for the most part, they probably hit about 20 home runs. Of course, I forgot to mention Ozzie Smith and Tommy Hurd, just to name a few. But nonetheless, you find that. And you run with it to the point. If that's your formula for success, you stick with it. And this is what I try to explain to some of the people who I know that are like analytics buffs. I'm like, listen, you guys are worried about this guy's pitch count and how many times he throws a fastball X, Y, and Z. You think they had that in Warren Spahn's day? You think they had that in Warren Marshall's day? And the answer is no. I mean, these guys, they went out there and pitched. They didn't have rather the same avenue for conditioning, strength, and training like these guys do now. But these guys went out there and they knew how to pitch. There was a game, and I think it was at some point in the 50s or 60s. It was between the Giants and I want to say it was the Milwaukee Braves. And I want to say it was Juan Marichal against Warren Spahn. And I could be wrong on this, right? I do believe it was Juan Marichal and Warren Spahn. The game went 16 innings. Both of those pitchers pitched the entire game. Exactly. You know what I'm saying? And the thing was, it was like, that's what baseball is. And I'm like, I'm not saying that, guys are going to go out there, start the game and finish the game in a situation like that. No. But, if a guy goes 6 innings now, he's tapped on the shoulder like, oh man, this is great. I'm like, listen, if he's still got something in the tank, go for it. And to that point, this is why, we saw it a couple of years ago during the shortened season during COVID, where, we had the universal DH, and I shook my head because I'm like, you know what, this is the beginning of the end. I love the contrast between the American League and National League, because the thing is, a National League game requires more strategy from a managerial aspect, because you got to keep your bench guys in place, because number one, you're going to need pinch hitters late in the games, but also double switch scenarios. That's something you don't have to worry about in the American League. And now, of course, with the universal DH, you're just going to take away from that, because the thing is this, it's like there's a little bit more strategy involved, of course, when the pitcher hits, because now it puts more pressure on that eighth guy in the lineup to kind of do something to kind of avoid that out, because let's say you have two outs and the eighth guy in the batting order comes up. If he gets a hit, that takes away from the strategy from the opponent, because now, as opposed to getting out of that inning and then starting off the next inning, having to face the pitcher and knowing more than likely it's a guaranteed out, now you've basically cleared the lineup and then you're starting back fresh for the next inning. So I'm really not a fan of that either. Like the tweaks, to your point, the tweaks that they're rolling with they're in line to make this game worse than it already is.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
And like for me, one other thing I definitely wanted to touch on with you gentlemen, I've talked about this in the past as well. I really think that Major League Baseball is walking the fine line of a razor's edge. And I say that because, to me, baseball is not as popular as it was before in this country. You have football. People are football crazy. I mean, you have people out there. Of course, we just had the Super Bowl last Sunday, and you already have people, they're already clamoring for the beginning of next season. Basketball, plenty of people follow basketball. We see soccer as a rising sport in regards to popularity in this country. I look at it like this. We're in February. This is when pitchers and catchers should have already reported, and we should have some stuff in regards to spring training. We don't have that. Okay, the NFL scouting combine is going to be coming up soon. NFL free agency is going to be starting soon. That's going to have be things that people are talking about. March Madness is right around the corner, and of course, once the NCAA tournament starts, that's what gets a lot of sports fans' focus going right there. Then on top of that, in the spring, we have the Stanley Cup playoffs. We also have the NBA playoffs as well as the NFL draft. All of those things are going to garner attention. And I think baseball is, they're losing an opportunity to keep their spot. And then on top of that, what makes matters worse, in my opinion, the cherry on the top, you have a scenario where sports betting is legal in so many places right now. And, now you're not going to have eyes on your product if you're baseball, and those eyes are going to be focused on something else. They are walking that fine line of the razor's edge, in my opinion, on this.
I think that the owners are okay with that, William. And for the same reasons that you just stated. I think they see how much competition there is for eyeballs. And I think that that's why they are willing to hold out right now till they're the only game in town. Because they say, well, if we're going to push really hard now, we're hoping to get some eyeballs through all of these other events, through all of these finals, through March Madness. They know they can't compete with those things anymore. So they're willing to let this drag on, to really stick it to the players, is my personal feeling. I don't have any information on that or anything like that, but that's my personal feeling. And that's why I feel like we're not going to lose the whole season, going back to your very first question, but that's why I feel like we're going to lose probably the start of the season. And then when they realize they're the only eyes, or they're the only game in town, and this is where they can really pick up a large audience, they're going to really want to be there. And then they're going to really buckle down.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at it, they have, for the most part, July is like the end of June and like beginning of July is their time, because the NBA's finished, NHL is finishing. And then you have that, just before training camp and the NFL starts. But, everybody doesn't fully pay attention to training camp in the NFL. I mean, I do, because like I always tell people, I don't make my picks for the Super Bowl until when training camp is winding down, because, people, there's always going to be a couple of guys who have a season-ending injury in training camp, and of course weeks 1 and week 2. That's a whole other topic there. But nonetheless, I feel like because even when the baseball playoffs roll around, you're right in the heart of the NFL season. It's really starting to like ramp up. Of course, college football as well. Then on top of that, you know, the NBA and NHL are both beginning at that point, like by the time we get to the World Series. So now, you know, you're going to have a scenario probably if they try to squeeze this thing in this year, the World Series is probably going to go further into November, possibly around Thanksgiving, maybe. But I'm like, you know, how far into November do you really want to push it, especially if we have a situation where we get like Northeastern teams in the Fall Classic, like a Boston, or New York, or Chicago, or Detroit? You know, do you really want to, you know, push it that far into the cold weather where it's like possibly 30-degree nights out there? I don't know. But it for me,
And,
no, go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead.
interrupt you for a second. Like, and maybe at what point do we start looking at, you know, do we really need 162 games in the baseball season? I mean, I've always thought that's it, just longer than it needs to be. Do you really need 162 to determine, uh, you know, a champion at the end of the season? No, you really don't. You probably get this figured out in 145 games or 132 or whatever. And I mean, then we don't have to go into November. I I enjoy baseball during the summer. I think fans enjoy baseball during the summer. I think the players enjoy baseball for the bulk of the summer. And once it starts getting past October, it becomes a different game too. You know, it's not just a game of attrition, which it's always seemed that way. Who's got the most healthy squad at the end of the season? But now if you're going to be having games in Detroit or Chicago or any of these like Midwest, you know, teams, it's a completely different game than if you're having games in Los Angeles or in Tampa. I mean, those teams are going to be healthier. I think they're in warmer weather. It's easier to play. The wear and tear on the human body is much different in markets like that versus, you know, these Midwest markets. It just is, you know. So I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, not at all. I mean, that definitely is a factor. I mean, you go back to last season, the Dodgers and Giants were the two best teams in the National League last year, and honestly, in baseball. And honestly, neither one of them got to the Fall Classic. Of course, that was, to me, I thought, the downside of the playoff format, because, you know, it was a shortened 5-game series, and you knew that somebody who won more than 100 games was going to be going home. And then, no disrespect to the Braves, but by the time that the Dodgers got them in the NLCS, you know, the Dodgers were not a fully healthy team, especially not the team that we saw win it all in 2020. Right. So, I mean, that's, to me, I think that's part of the disservice of it. I mean, the players, I'm sure, like, they're worn out at some point because, you know, you get the quote unquote dog days of summer, you know, they're out of gas. So I don't know, like, do they come back to the bargaining table and talk about the season? I mean, I'm not sure, because I'm like, every time we turn around, they're looking to expand the postseason and do this and do that. And I mean, to me, I think it has to either be one or the other. And you keep trying to tinker with something that, you know, at some point you're going to play around with the formula too much, and you're just going to dilute it too much to the point that nobody cares. 162 games is long enough to decide who the best team is. And generally, you know, a team knows law of averages. Hey, if we win 90 games, there's a pretty good chance that we win our division and we're in the postseason. And on some years, you know that 85 games might get you a wild card, depending, you know, on that year. I mean, you look at this past season, the Dodgers, obviously, I want to say they won 105 games in the regular season, and they faced St. Louis in the wild card game, and St. Louis won like 86 or 87 games. So that just shows you like the contrast there. But nonetheless, I think for me, there's there's just an aspect of, we really don't care. And I think that is the ultimate, slap in the face to the fans, because let's be realistic. This lockout could have been handled a lot differently than it has been. Okay, the contract expired. Just like any of us who have a job and we have a unionized job, okay, guess what? You can still work through, your contract, you still get a paycheck, and your union representatives and management, they're hashing out the details for your contract. Okay, you get your retro money, X, Y, and Z. The owners in this case did not have to lock out the players. They could have sat up there and they could have negotiated, could have played into the season without a deal, let everything just smooth itself out. It would have worked itself out, and then fine. But I think it's the egos. That's the part of it that's ruining this. And to me, I don't think that, to your point, Andy, how you talked about the 94 strike, I know people to this day that do not watch baseball because of the 94 strike. That was nearly 30 years ago. And of course, the home run boom of the late 90s was what brought a lot of people back to the game. If baseball flirts with not having a season this year, and I still think it's a possibility. I don't know how they're going to recover from this. I really don't.
Yeah, I don't know how they do either. Like you said, when they had the strike in '94, my dad was one. There was probably a good 5-6 years. He didn't watch any baseball. He'd still, after 5 years, would rant about it. And I'm just like, it's, they're playing that. It's okay. Life goes on. You know what I mean? It's just a strike. But yeah, they lost a lot of people that never came back. And if you do it again, and I don't know, I guess it just seems like this is always a baseball issue where they just can't work things out. And perfect example is what everyday people like us do. Like, if our bargaining contract expires, we work while our union represents us and negotiates. We'll work without a contract, and we'll get our retro pay and stuff like that, and things like you said will smooth themselves out. The lockout didn't have to happen. The owners released a statement saying that they have to cancel games up until March
5th,
March 5th, or cancel whatever. That didn't have to happen either. And the players said it didn't have to. They're just doing it because they want to at this point. And I don't know if it's for PR purposes or not. I guess I'm not. It doesn't make them look good in my eyes. I can't speak for everybody, but yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
why it's like this.
I think it's kind of a ploy to kind of, break the union. And I also think it's kind of a ploy when you're greedy, because, some of these like owners, they get so much as it is, the TV contracts, the revenue sharing. And it's just, to me, like, how much more do you want? And honestly, I don't blame the players for trying to seek out free agency a little bit earlier, because we've seen the problem that is created. Because you look at a guy like Vlad Guerrero, you look at a guy like Chris Bryant. These guys should have been up with the Blue Jays and Cubs respectively before they were, but they were held back because of the service time aspect, and like, just so the team could have said player on their roster 1 year longer before that player hits free agency. And, arbitration is just like the franchise tag in the NFL, where it's just like, they have you for an additional 3 years. You go to the arbiter. The team is going to argue why, you shouldn't get paid $15 million this year, and they want to pay you maybe $5 or $6 million. You name it. And sometimes it does cause a rift between, player and front office. And we've seen it in the past where some players, by the time they hit free agency, that was it. They were out the door. And of course, the one guy that who's going to have the players back in this entire process, it's Scott Boras, because, of course, Scott Boras wants top dollars for his clients. And of course, we saw Boras clients, rack up with big money just prior to the lockout. We saw Max Scherzer get the big deal from the New York Mets. We saw Javi Baez get the big deal from the Chicago Cubs. And I think that Boras still has a couple of big name guys out there who have not gotten contracts yet. But, of course, Boras wants top dollar for his guys, and rightfully so, because listen, he knows that these owners are sitting on a gold mine, and it's just like, listen, you guys want the world, but you don't want to pay for it. So I mean, there has to be a fine line someplace.
Well, the revenue during the course of this last CBA, the revenue for the owners is up 17%. It's been documented. So, the players are coming and they're asking for a lot, but they have good reason. The money is coming in from the TV deals and stuff. The money is there. It's not like they're asking for anything outlandish. So, like you say, it's a matter of greed, and the people that lose are the guys at this table, and you, people like you, William. We lose in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, AJ. Sorry.
No. I was just agreeing with Watucky. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, as a final thought, if you had to guesstimate, how many games do you think we get this year in the regular season?
I think you're going to see an 80-game regular season.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're going to see.
If we see a season at all, honestly, because of the rate that communication has been flowing, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't have a season. Both sides are that stubborn, but it would be nice to see an 80-game season just to prove that, it can be done in 80 games, and you can crown a champion. Similar to COVID,
I think that
the season was shortened due to COVID, and you still had a champion at the end of the season. And there was no talks of like, well, let's put an asterisk there or anything like that. It was nope. That's
the trophy still looks the same.
Exactly. Team still deserves to be champion. Yeah, I don't know. To me, that's something that's been taken off the bargaining table, is the length of the regular season, because I feel like there's, like you said, there's so much tinkering with other stuff going on. Like, let's put in the pitch clock, and and these are goofy, corny ideas that Rob Manfred has introduced to the game. Having a guy on second base during extra innings, like, what the hell? Yeah, it's you're screwing with the game. You're messing with the fundamentals of the game in a way that, like, if you're a baseball fan, you're a purist, and you don't appreciate that kind of tinkering. It's just, yeah. But I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So my thoughts: the 80 games, William Hoffman.
If we see a season at all, which I don't think we will, because, like I said, the rate of communication is just far too slow, and the stuff that needs to be knocked out or negotiated with, it's just not. It ain't happening. And I think ultimately the length of the regular season is what needs to be talked about, and it's being neglected. That conversation is being neglected entirely. And it's because of all these silly little arbitrary ideas, like a pitch count clock or a pitch clock. I don't see them making a whole lot of headway with these conversations, even if they do try to plow through them all in the next 4 or 5 days. I don't see progress.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just to piggyback off of what you said, I'm not optimistic either, because I mean, you figure it's too much trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and you guys really haven't been on the same page for the last three months and change. So what do you think is going to change within the next week or so?
Right.
Unless everybody comes off of their high horse, and like you said, check their egos at the door and really try to go out there and get this done. The optimist in me would say a 100 game season, and of course it'd be a sprint to the finish. I think it'd be a scenario similar to what we saw a couple of years ago during COVID, similar to what we saw in 1981 with the player strike, where you had more teams in the postseason. And I think, that they would probably do that same format again being that they didn't have a full season. But the pessimist and realist in me is saying, you know, we're not going to have baseball at all. And I've gone on record. I've talked about this in multiple podcasts, you know, prior to this one, and said, hey, listen, we're not going to have baseball at all. And I mean, today's February 21st. Honestly, if this is not worked out by the 1st of April, I don't think we have baseball, because because at that point it's going to be too much to try to, well, I mean, even let's just say Sega argument, they get something done on March 31st. What are you going to say? Okay, you're going to have spring training for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. The season is going to begin the last week of April, and it's really going to be a sprint to the finish as far as trying to get this done and trying to get the World Series in at, you know, a sensible time. This is not an NFL situation where you can push the Super Bowl back 1 or 2 weeks, because it's either going to be in a warm climate or you're going to be indoors in a dome. This is not an NBA, NHL situation where all of your games are played indoors. With baseball, you know, you got to factor in, do you really want to see the World Series played in late November, okay, in a Detroit, in a Washington, D.C., in a Philly, Boston, Chicago, places like that? So, and honestly, I think the powers to be in baseball have nobody to blame for this but themselves, because again, like we said before, and not to beat a dead horse, there's been no sense of urgency. If the CBA expired on December 2nd or like late November, whenever it was, and the owners locked out the players, they should have been in hard negotiations then, saying, hey, let's get this done. But you know, there was never a sense of urgency. And now all of a sudden, you know, to take a statement from, you know, John McKay or John Robinson, now everybody wants to go student body right to try to figure this out, but it's too late.
Yeah.
Yeah. Side note, though, William, I would actually like to see the World Series in Detroit in December. That would be fine with me.
Well, listen. I'll tell you like this. No, listen, I'll tell you like this. I mean, let's be realistic. A World Series in Detroit in December, okay, at that point, everybody knows the Lions have already clinched a top 3 spot in the NFL draft. There's really not much of a need to go to Ford Field to see the games anymore. So it's like, okay, well, it's 30 degrees outside, but hey, you know what? Let's go across the parking lot to Comerica and sit down and watch and watch the Tigers play. You know, what do you have to lose?
Exactly.
So gents, as always, I want to take this time out. I appreciate, you know, everything that we talked about on this podcast. You know, I didn't want it to be a one-time shot the last time, and I definitely not. It's obviously not a one-time shot, because we've been back on here together again, and we'll definitely have to do something again soon. But I want to give you gentlemen this opportunity to tell the fine folks out there about you and what you're doing and where they can find you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just wanted to compliment your Billups jersey in the background there. Really appreciate that.
What makes you think it's not an Allen Iverson jersey?
Oh
No. It is Chauncey Billups. It is Chauncey Billups.
Okay.
I was just teasing you, man.
No better. I know that you wouldn't get an Allen Iverson jersey. You're a New York guy. And he was a Philly guy. So for the most part. Yeah. But yeah, we're Watucky and I are from the mid-Michigan area, the Great Lakes Bay region in Michigan. And we're diehards, you know, Detroit fans. Our own podcast, the Small Market Podcast, covers all kinds of stories. We'll have anybody on our show. We got, you know, we've connected with you, and you've been an awesome like host and collaborator with us. So we really appreciate that. You know your stuff for sure. And we're fans of the 300 pounds of, you know, sports knowledge podcast. We watch you guys. We watch you all the time, William. So thank you for having us on, man. Really appreciate it.
Well, listen, thank you guys for the support, and you'll be the first to hear this, and anybody else who's listening to this podcast will hear this, because, you know, we are growing on the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge channel on YouTube. We're closing in on 300 subscribers, and I'll say it right here. You can't be 300 pounds of sports knowledge without 300 subscribers. So that's
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we hope some of our listeners subscribe to your channel. We're closing in on 100 episodes ourselves.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Well, thanks again for having us on, William. Appreciate it.
Gentlemen, as always, it was a pleasure. And I just want to say to any of you fine folks out there who have been listening to us, first and foremost, thanks a bunch to Andy and AJ from the Small Market Podcast. They gave you their info where you can find them. Also, if you like what you saw and heard on this podcast, please feel free to hit the like button as well as subscribing to this channel. If you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. Also, there is a sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. And on a side note, today, 1 year ago today, I lost somebody very, very special to me, who unfortunately is no longer with us today. And she's no longer here physically, but I know her spirit lives on. And I just want to take this time to say, Mom, I love you. And I will always love you. And I just hope that you're looking down and you can see what we're doing here and be very proud. So for Andy and AJ, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.